In this lesson, we'll learn techniques for seamlessly cycling animation. We're going to be working on an idle for our aircraft, and along the way we'll learn those techniques that can be applied to any types of cycles you'll work on. Now, first things first, what I like to do is work with odd numbers of frames. The reason why, that's going to give us a nice midpoint to work with that will have an even amount of frames before that midpoint and an even amount of frames after. So if we were to go to our time configuration dialog, let's go ahead and set the time we're going to be using. That's going to be a start time of 1 and an end time of 33. Press OK. Our midpoint in this case is going to be frame 17. Now, we will be working with auto key, so what I'll go ahead and do is go to Customize Preferences and make sure the auto key default frame is going to be set to frame 1. And I'll press OK. Alright, so now we can basically start our animation. I'll turn on auto key. I'll go to the key filters and make sure everything is going to be turned off except for position. We'll start with position keys and then we'll move to adding a little bit of rotation to finish. Alright, now on frame 17 we can drop our ship slightly, and now we have the first segment of movement in our cycle. And something you want to keep in mind as well is your default in and out tangent types. Okay, again we can use auto, which it should automatically be set to. Alright, so now that we have some movement from frames 1 to 17, to continue this movement we basically need to make sure our last pose is going to match our first pose. The reason why is if there's a slight change in that last pose, what's going to happen is we're going to notice a pop. So an idea of this, if we hit play, notice that type of snap we're getting here. So that snap would definitely be distracting. So what we'll go ahead and do is take this first key and we'll clone it all the way to our last. So as we hit play, here's what we get. Much better. Alright, so now that that's done, we can go to our miniature curve editor and just take a look at our curves to be mindful of how our interpolation is coming about. Alright, so everything's looking quite well. If anything, I think we can take this key on frame 17 and bring it up just a little bit more, just so that we're getting a little bit more of a subtle result. If it's moving too much, then it won't look like an idle, but it'll instead look like something's wrong with our ship. Alright, so now that that's done, we can start to add some rotation keys. So I'll go to the key filters and turn on rotation, turn off position, and we'll go to the midpoints between these two keys. So at about frame 19, okay, being mindful of also the direction the ship's moving in, on frame 9, rather, we can go ahead and rotate the ship so that its left side is going to be a little bit higher. And I'll also turn off angle snap. So we could just rotate a little bit more subtle than what the angle snap would give us. Alright, so here's what we get. A nice rotation as the ship is moving down. Then as it moves up, we can simply mirror this pose on frame 9. So a way to do that is to, let's say, hold down shift, hold down the left mouse button, drag to frame 25, that is. We're only setting rotation key, so we'll just press OK. And then we can go to our curve editor, we can go to our rotation Y track, and then we can take this value here and simply set a negative value for our key stat. So a quick way to do that is to right click the key, go to its value, and set this to negative. Hit enter. So here's what we get in the curve editor. Now this type of flipping would only work if our original values, our default values for our controls or for our objects we're animating, have been zeroed out. And that's actually more of a rigging topic, but essentially what we'd want to do is reset our X form and make sure our position and rotation list, and even scale if we're animating with that, have been set to 0 before we begin animating. And that's going to make things much more convenient for the animator. Alright, so now that that's done, okay, we can now basically make sure we have a similar pose for our last frame. So for this Y track, I'll just go ahead and hold down Shift from the first key and drag this to frame 33. And being that we know that our value should be set to 0 if we were to right click that first key, if we select the next key, let's make sure its value is going to be set to 0 by right clicking on our value slider. Okay, so here's what we get when we hit play. Alright, so we are getting some nice movement now, but we can definitely see that there is a pause in the animation. So before we actually move on to the next lesson where we finish our cycle, what we're going to go ahead and do is just go to our tracks that have animation. That's our Z track, Z position track, and also our Y rotation track. And we'll now go to the controller menu and choose out of range types. And then we'll set this to cycle. Great. So now that that has been done, we'll stop the lesson here, and in the next lesson we will finish our seamless cycle.